we mentioned on all of our social media and everything like that, that today we're going to be talking about discrimination in football. And that's because there are only 3 or minority ethnic managers in the top 4 leagues in English football right now. Brighton and Hove Albion's Chris Hughton, Keith Curle at Carlisle United, and Grimsby Town's Marcus Bignot. The former Shadow Sports Minister, Chi Onwurah, has called this an evidence of institutional failure. And many footballing figures, including former FA Chairman Greg Dyke, have called for a version of the Rooney Rule to be introduced. This would involve football clubs interviewing at least one black or minority ethnic candidate for senior coaching roles. Sports journalist Michael McCann has produced a short documentary called The Ugly Side of the Beautiful Game, Discrimination in Football. And as part of his documentary, he spoke to the Cardiff City under-21 coach, Michael Johnson. Take a look at this.
People say to me, well, there's no black managers. You tell me, managers. There's managers and coaches that want to be, in positions. It's just not happening.
The statistics suggest change is needed. BME people represent 25% of all professional players and 14% of the population, but just 4.2% of all those in senior coaching positions and only 3.3% of first-team Football League managers. Johnson has completed every single football coach and management qualification possible, including his pro licence, governance, FA coach educator, all FA youth modules and his LMA diploma in football management, yet has applied for 40 jobs since his retirement and had just 3 interviews. The statistics show that there's clearly a problem with a lack of BME managers and coaches. What do you think are the reasons for that?
It's a good question, because you do try and eliminate everything. And I thought about, okay, it's not qualifications wise, and then you start to think, okay, it might be experience, and then it comes down to it could be the colour of your skin. They don't know any better, So sometimes, the chief executive chairmen will go with somebody they feel more comfortable with, somebody who looks like them, talks like them, and sometimes that's not always the best decision or road to go down.
Do you think enough is being done at the minute to encourage more BME managers and coaches?
No, absolutely not. There's still lots of work to be done. You look at the current game right now, I can count on one hand how many managers of colour are out there operating in the 4 levels of English football.
Well, joining me now on Sportuccino is the documentary maker of the ugly side of the beautiful game, discrimination in football management. Sports journalist Michael McCann joins me live from his kitchen. Michael, I hear you've had a pretty late night with your Christmas do. So delighted you were able to get up this morning, because this is such an important topic to talk about, isn't it, Michael?
Well, exactly. It makes for a bit of a contrast from a night out with my TalkSport colleagues enjoying the festive season. This is a far more serious issue, and one that's certainly not as fun to discuss, but it needs to be discussed. So it's fantastic for you to get me on and again give a platform. It's not really about me, this, in any shape or form. I think it's the kind of journalism that we need to see more of, really, looking at issues in the game that might not be sexy as such, but really need to be dug down into and examined in great detail.
So you mentioned in your documentary, in that small clip we just played, it's around 25% of black or minority ethnic football players in the top 4 leagues, but it's only about 3.3% who are actually in managerial positions. Why do you think that gap is so big?
There's obviously a vast range of reasons. You'll hear, if you go on terraces or speak to fans, some very simplistic ones being trotted out, that the research is showing from the Sports People's think tank is simply not true. I think unconscious bias is a huge thing. This is the idea that if you aren't aware of the way that you think and make decisions, you will instinctively recruit people who look like you, talk like you, and sound like you, when actually that's not the best way to get good results as a coach or manager, because you want people who think differently, who have different cultures and ideas and backgrounds. And also, quite simply, it's not the best way to be. I think the really important thing to make clear in that gap, Richard, is it's not a simple case of all of football is racist. In fact, it's really that's a far too simplistic explanation, and it wouldn't even be right to say that all of football actively discriminates against black managers. But it's an idea of creating a pipeline to make it easier for young black coaches to encourage black players when leaving the game to see a future in coaching and management. And this goes on to back to Michael Johnson, which is he spent 10 or 15 years in the top two divisions of the game throughout much of his playing career. He's done every coach and management qualification possible, and he's now got a gig at Cardiff City in the under-21 side. But it took him years to just get to that point when he's as qualified as you can get. And you can understand why other potential black managers and coaches look at what Jono's done, and obviously they admire him for it, but they think, well, why should I bother as such? And that's a huge problem.
Okay, so there are talks about the Rooney Rule, of some version of that being introduced into the UK. They use it in the NFL. What do you think about that? And, well, first of all, just tell us a little bit more about the Rooney Rule, and then give us your thoughts on whether it would work in the UK and in football.
Well, I think the thing I should firstly make clear, because anyone who's done a bit of looking around my Twitter or might do after this in interest at what we're discussing, is that although I do a fair bit of communications work for the Sports People's Think Tank, which is an organisation that's campaigned on this issue, I'm speaking today just purely from my own individual viewpoint. And I would call for the Rooney Rule. I know a lot of people agree with that. Chris Hughton just the other day said it again, and that picked up a fair bit of local press coverage, which was good to see. The most important thing I would say about the Rooney Rule, and you can see it on the additional clips on the playlist that I've created beyond the documentary, just short things, is Leon Mann actually says this: it's not giving a job to a black person because they are black. It is addressing these institutional barriers in the game, such as unconscious bias, such as the discrepancy in the statistics that you mentioned, by giving a black person an opportunity in an interview to impress someone who they wouldn't have got the chance to sit in front of. And I think most people in any career can relate to the fact that in an interview, you might not necessarily get that job, but if you impress that decision maker, you can build a relationship that means that they might recommend you to another chairman, or when they need an under-21s coach or a first team coach 6 months, a year later, they'll think of you where they wouldn't have otherwise met you. And I don't think that gets stressed enough. This is not positive action in a sense of someone deserving a job. It's just deserving a fair chance like everyone else, and getting one BME candidate into every interview scenario, for me, is a must to start to create that change. And the success that it's had in America, I think, is testament to the fact that it's a good way to go. And in fairness to the EFL, they've got a voluntary code this year with 10 clubs involved, built around a version of the Rooney Rule, which is promising signs going forward.
So you are here representing yourself as a sports journalist, but you did mention that you do work for the Sports People's Think Tank. Tell us a little bit more about them.
So the Sports People's Think Tank is essentially looking at the voices of sports people whilst they're in their careers, because a lot of the time we see athletes, you know, they're concerned with their self-image, but we rarely hear from athletes in terms of their opinions about their sport, because often they're scared for one reason or another to speak out. And the Sports People's Think Tank, broadly speaking, is about encouraging athletes to do that. And one of the main issues that it started out with, it's diversified significantly in recent years, was Michael Johnson, Leon Mann, Jason Roberts and Darren Moore, three of whom are ex-Premier League players, and of course Leon's a leading sports journalist, were looking at the statistics that we've referred to and partnering with Dr. Stephen Bradbury to do a ton of sociology research year after year after year. They've just been back to Parliament, which I attended with the SPTT for the third time, the second time I've attended, to present that evidence to the governing bodies, to MPs, and try to stir more of a discussion to help create a climate of change and basically speed up the pace of that change, really, in any way possible.
Yeah, you've had those discussions. What's the next step now, Michael?
Well, the problem with an issue like this is it's not just going to change in a year. One thing I would say that Michael Johnson said that really has stuck with me, and he said this on multiple occasions, is if you look at what women on boards did with the Davis report, they set a target. They said in 5 years' time, and this was a while back now, it's well documented, we want, I believe it was 25%. I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong. And they set that target of we want 25% of women on boards, which doesn't sound like much, but at the time that was a ginormous leap. And basically, in short, they did it. Because once you set a target, it gives people a more clearer goal than a year on year, oh, we'll try and keep things progressing, and it's very difficult to measure. And if there's one thing I'd call for to create a unifying idea around which people can think of trying to create change, it would be to try and maybe, to me, the logical target has always seemed to be to match the population level before we look at Premier League players, which the population is approximately 13% BME. And obviously currently the figures are about 3%. So matching the population would seem, or getting in and around that area would seem an ideal start to me.
Yeah, I think that would be a good first step of getting a little bit closer to what is needed. Michael McCann, it's been so great to get your thoughts on all of this. It's a really important topic. Where exactly can we watch the whole documentary, and how can we continue to learn everything you know about this topic and football and sports in general on social media?
Well, thank you very much for having me on. It's always good to talk about it. So my Twitter handle is @thisismccann, McCann exactly as you'd expect it to be spelt, 2 C's, 2 N's. And if you head onto my YouTube as well, or just the easiest way, to be honest, is type in The Ugly Side of the Beautiful Game, and it should appear relatively high up on Google, and have a look for yourself. Any coverage of this issue is always welcome, because I don't see it enough in mainstream media, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, go and watch that. I've watched it myself. It's a really good piece. Michael McCann, the sports journalist, thank you for being on Sportuccino this morning.
Thank you very much, Richard. My pleasure.